Welcome back.
Hello.
Oh, I see you're going, are you?
You go, mate. After you, sir.
I was going to just say that this is episode 222. I'm Ben Marshall, and co-hosting, as always, is Tom Major, and we have a closer to home episode, I think is the way to put it. We have a absolutely personal research focused episode, which I think we've only done a couple of times before, but it's a bit of a treat. And we have one of the papers out of Tom's PhD, one of presumably several more, or certainly a couple more coming up, right? That will almost be bounced around on the show.
Yeah, there's one more definitely meaty one coming, and then hopefully another smaller one, which I won't be leading. Maybe even another couple, actually.
Yeah,
it kind of depends how it all goes, but yeah, there's more to come.
Exactly. Yeah. So get used to it.
Yeah, it's exciting actually. It's nice to have, it's rare to have an opportunity to toot the own horn. So here we are doing an episode all about some work. But also, Ben, it's the first time that we've collaborated on some research, which is
insane. That this is the first paper that we're actually both authors together on.
Yeah, it is weird, really. It's mad it's taken this long. But it's great that it has happened. I'm sure it won't be the last. So yeah, we're talking about this paper. I'll introduce it. It's about Aesculapian snakes. So it's by Major Geoffrey Russell, Bracegirdle, Gandini, Morgan, Marshall, Mulley, and Wüster 2024. A reliance on human habitats is key to the success of an introduced predatory reptile. And as Ben said, yeah, paper resulting from my PhD research at Bangor University. So yeah, just like big up, shout outs to all of the co-authors on this. Obviously, Ben, you were instrumental in designing the study and then subsequently helping with the analysis and making the figures look absolutely banging. And then beyond that, everyone on this list is just like a legend who really helped immensely with my PhD. So shout outs to all of these co-authors. They'll all probably come up in various guises throughout the episode, but it was really fun. We did some radio tracking, and this paper having come out has been quite nice. We're going to talk about some of the media response that it has generated afterwards, because I feel like people might be interested to hear what it's like as a scientist when your work gets picked up by the media, because it can be a bit of a mixed bag emotionally.
It's always fun, right? So nothing ever goes wrong or misrepresented or dubiously quoted. Flawless.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a big learning experience. The whole media side of things. It's part and parcel of life. It's good that the media want to cover your work, but then you kind of have to sort of slowly try and guide that ship, and not, especially when you work on snakes, you don't want it to become too sort of sensationalized or wild.
Right.
But yeah, and also, so this work was radio tracking Aesculapian snakes. So this is a species of snake which is not, strictly speaking, native to the UK. We had them about 300,000 years ago, but they went extinct in the intervening period, probably because of cooling climate in the intervening period. There would have been periods where most of the UK was ice and not so good for snakes. So they came across on a land bridge, but then sea levels rose, the land bridge went away, and then subsequent glaciated periods kind of probably took them out and stopped them being in the UK. But they did used to be in the southeast UK long time ago.
Well, before anything could be called UK as well, I think.
Yeah, that's fair to say. Yeah, the UK was just, it wasn't even a notion in anyone's mind. But yeah, they've been introduced twice to the UK. So they got introduced once in the 1960s to the Welsh Mountain Zoo in Colwyn Bay, North Wales. So this is where we were doing this study. There is another population on the banks of the Regent's Canal in London. That population's been there since the 1980s. That population stemmed from an introduction after snakes became loose following the Inner London Education Authority shutting down. Maybe not entirely an accidental thing, but the snakes have been there since the 80s. It's nothing to do with London Zoo. I don't know that they've ever kept Aesculapian snakes. They might have in their long history, but London Zoo does form a lot of the area in which the snakes inhabit. So both these populations are kind of zoo-based, which is really
convenient.
I guess, yeah, it's convenient for sure. Yeah. The Welsh Mountain Zoo collaborated on this research. They were a commercial partner for my PhD, and they were just amazing. Could never have done it without them. The staff it was just so fun because we were on site pretty much every day just looking for snakes. And if any of them saw a snake, they'd like give us a shout. It'd come over the radio or whatever. "Oh, there's been a snake," or occasionally they'd pick them up and hang on to them for us, which was really awesome. And yeah, it's a similar story in London Zoo. They are seen on the grounds of the zoo. Obviously, London Zoo is a lot bigger than the Welsh Mountain Zoo in Colwyn Bay. It's a lot busier. But the snakes seem to do broadly similar things. Like you can walk around London Zoo and there's a few hedgerows where you can like reliably just see a snake basking, and, you know, hundreds of people walking past it in pretty much what is central London. The vast majority of them never notice them, to a point where the snakes there's like a towpath right by the Regent's Canal there, and there's like a wrought iron fence, and snakes just sit there basking, just coiled around this fence, with people coming past all day, people taking selfies with the snake. The snake's just indifferent. I've never seen
that little path is where I feel like most of the pictures of them come from. Like I can see in my mind's eye pictures of yeah.
There's some really awesome pictures, actually. There's a photographer called Jason Steele who's been involved with trying to survey the snakes for a long time. And he's got a website which has got some really cool pictures of like the snakes in this like urban setting. There's like a towpath in the background with some graffiti on a wall. It like looks proper London, and there's just an Aesculapian snake sat on the floor. And yeah, there is some work ongoing. We're collaborating with, it's me and my friend Ben Wilkie. He's from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Amphibian and Reptile Group. He's also an ecologist. And it was his idea really to pick it back up. And we're now monitoring the snakes at London in collaboration with Hampshire and Isle of Wight Amphibian and Reptile Group, and then Bournemouth University, me, and ZSL, Zoological Society of London, who have been awesome as well. So yeah, we're hoping to find out how many there actually are.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're saying monitoring, what's that? Like mark recapture sort of deal?
Yeah, that's it. Mark recapture, and we got the license to mark and re-release, because one of the things with this species being non-native, technically, is that you aren't allowed, once you pick them up, it's against the law to put them back down. So if you catch them for any reason, you have to
an insanely
bring them into captivity.
Difficult to enforce law, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, I know a couple of people who picked them up and put them down, and the snake police didn't get them. But you never know. And you know, these rules are rules for a reason, I guess. And but yeah, we've got the license, so we're now implanting them with not radio tags, with pit tags, and we can then identify which individuals are which. And there's another guy called Will Atkins who's actually been monitoring the population since around, I think, 2007, something along those lines, a long time. So he's got a nice catalogue of like various different individuals. And actually, I caught a snake in 2023 in London, which I read his book because he wrote a short online book about the snakes in London, the Aesculapian snakes in London, which is well worth a read if you can find. It's on Kindle, and he talked about this specific individual snake called Stubby, which had basically no tail. And straight away, I was like, I know that snake. That was the first adult we ever found, and she has really got like no tail. It's crazy. I've never seen any snake actually with like such a badly damaged tail. It's just a real little stub. But yeah, it's got to be the same snake. And so that snake is at least, 2007, that's like 17 years old. 18, probably 18 years old this year. So they're
got to be suggesting the population is reasonably safe there if you can have snakes surviving that long, right?
It's so difficult to know, isn't it? Because it could just be that one snake is like unbelievably savvy. But you'd think that if it had lived that long, then at least a few of them are. I mean, my kind of vibe about the population in London is that there aren't that many. I reckon it's quite a bit smaller than the Welsh population. But it's difficult to say because underneath London Zoo and the surrounding area is a whole network of pipes and tunnels and all sorts of stuff.
Filled with tasty snake food.
Exactly. So they could just be hanging out underground for the most part, which is why the research is so interesting, to try and work out how many there are.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are talking about the ones in Wales, which one of the things we did as part of my PhD and also the master's project of Lauren Jeffrey, who's the second author of this paper, who is an absolute legend. Lauren will do anything it takes to track snakes. I've seen her absolutely send it into a bush, which was never going to end well. A thorn bush just diving head first. She's quite small stature. She literally just, her whole body went into the bush. She came back out with the snake. Subsequently, we tracked that snake.
I mean,
so,
that's,
it wouldn't have been.
Yeah, that's the price of field work, right? That's the price of getting a job done. That's
just
it's respectable.
No hesitation. But yeah, so we implanted 21 snakes with radio transmitters to try and understand what they get up to, because their ecology is like pretty mysterious, really. And we got 13 males and 8 females.
Even if it's not sort of mysterious in sort of grand sense of Aesculapians as a species, the specific context of Welsh Mountain Zoo introduced population far further north than you would expect and things like that. There's a lot going for this that makes it a very sort of intriguing case study regardless of the species, right? Like it's how are they getting away with it sort of questions.
Yeah, and they are found like quite far north, but not as far north as this. I think they were found in Denmark up until the early 1900s. They went extinct naturally. So I think that was pretty much an equivalent latitude in terms of northerliness as North Wales. And then there are some populations in northern Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, which are quite far north, but nothing as far as this is. And I think what's surprising about this site in Wales particularly is that you'd expect if there was a reptile which had created an introduced population somewhere, you'd think it would be on like a south-facing slope, which was like really sunny and just like super nice.
Everything else has to work out to make up for the fact that they're a higher latitude than perhaps they're suited. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas with these guys, it's like really shady, super cold slope. It's like exposed because it's North Wales. It gets a lot of rain. So it really isn't what you would think from a sort of suitable habitat for snakes. It really is quite cold, which, kind of makes it all the more surprising. But we radio tracked these snakes. We followed them. We chased them around the countryside. We did this for two summers. So it was about 10 or 11 months of tracking in total. And
they are polite enough to calm down in the winter, so you do get some time of not needing to follow them around. That's the sort of additional added benefit, right? It's a more limited activity periods. So
if you're a fair weather field worker, snakes are the perfect animal because
if it's temperate snakes.
Yeah, that's true. Temperate snakes. That's a very good point. But certainly for us in Wales, it was like, it's a cold day today. Or even just, it's now become winter. So, no point doing any snake stuff.
Right.
And if you're looking for snakes and it's raining, it's pretty much a waste of time. You're not really going to find anything. So on rainy days, at least when we were surveying, looking for snakes, we could kind of take it easy. And actually, even when we were radio tracking, if it was a rainy day, we'd just drive around all the places where we knew the snakes were and kind of like lean out the window with the radio kit and from the car.
They're still there.
Hasn't moved. So it's quite nice. But we followed them around. We did some really intense tracking of some individuals. We did some less intense tracking of other individuals. Lauren was really interested in finding out whether we could do more frequent tracks to determine what their like movement pathways were.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, despite our best efforts, we didn't really get any sort of like nice, clean results on that. I think you may need to do a finer tracking schedule, or maybe, don't know, not quite sure. But we did get some interesting stuff in terms of like their habitat preferences. And the big one, which is probably why this story has kind of hit the news in the way it has, is the fact that the male snakes had a preference for buildings in particular. And they were frequently going into buildings, sheltering, spending quite a bit of time. And when we say going into buildings, we're talking about like crawl spaces in people's lofts, inside wall cavities, inside outbuildings,
little sort of sheltered, warm, maybe a little rodent sort of snuck in there. Maybe another snake's been sort of sheltering in there because you've also got this nice heightened like mating season movement, right? For the males that pops up.
Yeah.
Was that connected to the building stuff, or were those
Not
sort
so
of heightened
much.
movements more going between places as opposed to building to building?
Yeah, no, I think the building stuff was sort of more sheltering. The males had this big peak in activity in the kind of earliest part of the summer, so like end of June, or even sort of throughout June, really. And that is kind of associated with them just traveling around long distances, searching for mates. So it's that time of year when you really see them like making these long distance moves around, a snake might go 500 or 600 meters in a day, just crawling around. And a snake traveling, they tend to sort of stay in the undergrowth or on the edges of things, like where there's a
classic
little bit of
field
cover.
margin, staying out of open areas that you're more vulnerable in. I mean, I think that's being seen again and again with snake species.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes a lot of
But
sense.
it's crazy, even if, you know, we're tracking these things for months and you go a long time without seeing them. And actually, when you do actually get an opportunity to see the snake doing snake stuff, it's a real privilege. It's such a rare occurrence. I had one where I was like sat in the woods and I could tell this snake was coming. And I knew that I was kind of between the snake and its favorite hidey hole, which was in someone's loft. And I just sat down on the floor and waited about like 10 meters back from where he was, the sort of level he was at in these woods. And he just slowly but surely slithered past me, which was really cool. It was really nice. And he was on his way back to this house. But what we tended to see was that a snake would go out and sort of be active. And it's a bit of a generalization, but generally it would be between sort of like 1 or 2 days active, going around outside of a safe location. And then once it found what it was looking for, be that food, most likely I think it was food.
Yeah.
The snake would then return back to its kind of safe hidey hole. And these hidey holes typically were like buildings, you know, like hay bales wrapped in black plastic. That was a favorite thing where another one would go. There was a few which inhabited, there was this like pipe underneath the road, like adjacent to a road, and it was always really warm there and it smelled of gas. The snakes loved it for some reason. So it's just like some kind of weird artificial gas zone that was warm, and they're just sitting
just
there.
getting a kick out of the fumes then, weren't they? Just having having a great time.
Yeah, it's one of those weird places where every time you go there, it's just really snaky. Like there would quite often be snakes hanging around.
It's not insanely surprising though, because you are talking about an introduced species, and time again when we talk about sort of introduced species or invasive species or whatever you want to call them, there's always this twist of them being able to make use of those little corners that native species just quite haven't, you know, they've been forced out of for whatever reason, and there's just enough of a niche that someone with a little bit more of a generalist tendency or a little bit sort of maybe a little bit more desperation can just sort of slide in there and make it work. And I do wonder whether those sort of edge cases might be kind of that, and that's what's sort of helping them out is being able to make use of those little unexpected corners.
That's really the way I see Aesculapian snakes, is just these kind of like, and I think we put a line in the paper about this, just like they are these kind of adaptable generalists who are pretty flexible. You know, they're rat snakes, they can climb, they can get up into places, and the kind of their modus operandi when they're traveling around is like intense curiosity. You know, they're like poking their nose in everything. They'll try and, a lot of what they're doing is like looking in holes. So they'll go around fields looking in holes for like moles or mice, and then they'll also scoot around hedgerows looking for baby birds' nests. And I think that extends to climbing structures and looking in crevices for prey, I think. But then perhaps that sort of, if they find a nice cozy space when they're rooting around on the side of a house, if they find a little cozy hole to go and sleep in when no predators can get them, they'll just do it. Which is quite a fun part of their ecology. Really, it did shock some people that there were snakes in their houses, but by and large, the residents of Colwyn Bay know about the snakes and kind of appreciate them because it's like unique to their area.
It's fun. They're not called, you know. It's not even like they cause that much mess, right? Like they're not.
No.
They're not going to chew on your wires or anything even remotely inconvenient. I don't know, they strike me as quite polite.
Yeah, but that was one of the best things about this field work, actually, was that we made friends with loads of the local people who would just like invite us into their gardens. You know, if someone has a snake in their garden, we'd be back and forth twice a day to track it, and it's not going anywhere. We're just like, hey, how's it going? So yeah, we had some absolutely awesome friendships with local people and just used to shoot the breeze and talk about snakes loads, which was really fun. And you know, there were times where like a snake would leave someone's compost heap, and it was a bit like, be seeing you, you know, like we've been here every day for 2 months, and now it's like we don't have a reason to come. We'll still come and stop by. Yeah, but yeah, so the snakes travel around. The males seem to have this preference for buildings. Females use buildings too, but we didn't quite have the sample size for females, so maybe I think if we had more, maybe that would have come out in the wash. But one thing the females were
really. There's not really anything to suggest that they wouldn't, right? Like ecologically, sort of the natural history wise, there's no reason to think that females would be different in that way.
Not really. I mean, the females are slightly more heavily bodied than the males.
Right.
So it's, you know,
maybe
I think
fewer opportunities to fit in places, but that's...
Yeah, and also just a little bit less like mobile in terms of like arboreality.
Right,
But
right.
I don't know. I think that's a bit of a stretch to say that really.
Yeah.
I think they are broadly probably quite similar. There might be a bit of partitioning of the habitat by males and females, but we didn't have the data to sort of comment on that.
No,
But,
it might be. It might also be happening at a scale that just the sampling and the precision couldn't pick up anyway, right? Like it's you can only you can keep looking in more detail and more detail and more detail, but that always requires more and more sort of field effort, doesn't it? And there's a limit to that.
Yeah. But we had a great time, and like I say, just shout outs to Guillaume and Becca and Antonio and Reese, who helped with the implantation surgeries, and obviously Wolfgang, legend, our supervisor, and John, who's really good with all the bureaucracy. But yeah, so one thing I wanted to touch on while we're talking about Aesculapian snakes is the fact that when you're tracking snakes, you kind of realize that their lives are pretty dangerous. You don't really appreciate it. Okay, now and again you see a snake run over on the road, but when you're actually intensively following them for their whole lives, you really do see quite how frequently their grisly ends are met.
Mm-hmm.
And we had that in this study. We had one get eaten by a buzzard, so it got carried away to a buzzard's nest and probably torn apart. We had another one.
The real kicker of that story is, was the transmitter destroyed at the point of predation, or were you thinking that you were following a snake and it led you to a nest?
We thought we were following a snake, and then I thought it was a snake in a tree for about 5 days. I was in denial.
Perfectly
and it was
reasonable.
Becca who was like,
I mean, a snake making its way to a nest is that's classic generalist colubrid sort of behavior, right?
Yeah, exactly. But then when it stayed up there for 5 days without moving,
then you start being
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Becca and Antonio were like, mate, the snake's dead. You got to deal with it. And then eventually I spent a bit of time by the transmitter because I was like, well, I want to know exactly what's happened. And I got my binoculars out and I looked in the tree and there was a buzzard's nest up there. I was like, okay, that's probably not a coincidence, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, we
they
had
weren't
buzzard.
heat sensitive
Another one.
Transmitters either, were they?
They were.
Yeah,
they were.
And that didn't clue you in that it was colder than it should have been?
It actually didn't, no. I don't recall them having a particularly lower beep. Yeah. It might have been quite warm up in the tree as well.
Yeah, direct sunlight and stuff, potentially, yeah.
I can't remember.
Or a buzzard sitting on it, of course.
And also, yeah, that's a good question, though. I didn't clock that. But we also had another one got eaten by a stoat, we think. Really beautiful snake called Freddie, who got eaten by a stoat. One of them was cannibalized by another Aesculapian snake, which we published as a short note because that was quite an unusual observation. This is the first time that cannibalism had been like sort of actually documented. There's like talk of it having happened before, I think, but we couldn't find any evidence. So yeah, one of our
I feel like that's often the case
with
any snake dietary anything, is you can make some really good assumptions and inferences on what they probably are eating X, Y, and Z, but like to actually evidence it is, especially something that might be quite rare, like cannibalism. Yeah,
this is it. I think cannibalism probably is quite rare, and it might be just an opportunistic thing. We're not exactly sure what happened, but he the big male ate the smaller female, which was quite a surprise. And then we had a few different snakes got hit by cars. I think 3 of the 21 got hit by cars, 2 of which were females who were traveling to lay their eggs. So we had a bit in the paper about whether or not that was a risky time for them.
Yeah, I mean, I put money on it being a risky time, 100%. I think that's again something that sort of mirrors a lot of other snake species. Size of road was going to be my question, because there was a pretty sizable dual carriageway just north of Welshman and Zoo, right?
Yeah, I never saw any snakes attempt that one. I don't know that in the history of the population any snakes have ever actually attempted that one, because we did surveys over the other side of that road to see if they'd spread across there to the north, and we didn't find any snakes. The closest I got was a very eccentric man telling me he'd seen a grass snake there, but no Aesculapian snake.
Not quite what you're looking for, but you know.
No, but the road they got hit on was 2 lanes. So both those females, it was just a 2-lane road, like a classic housing estate road. It's the road that runs around the edge of the zoo. And there's like a stone wall on one side, and they both got hit pretty much exactly the same spot. And it was around the time of year where they would be on their way to lay eggs, and they both had fully, like not what looked like quite well developed eggs.
But heading that way.
Yeah, unfortunately, they both died. It was really sad, actually. Those ones, like the one where I was actually actively tracking the snake. I was like walking up the road, and I was like, "This is a dodgy place for a snake," because she spent the night before in this wall, which is right up against the road, after living in a garden for like 6 weeks. And then the next morning, I was walking up the road, and I could tell I was getting close, and I bumped into this lady, and she was like, "Oh yeah, my husband saw a snake run over this morning," and I was like, "Oh man!" And
there
sure
we
enough,
go.
it was her. Yeah. And then one of them actually got run over on the inside the zoo itself. There's like a road that goes from the entrance to the car park inside, and got hit there, which is obviously rough as well. So yeah, they live quite dangerous lives. It's a hard life being a snake. And you mentioned earlier that we noticed there was a peak in the breeding season for the males moving around.
Right.
We also noticed that same peak for females, but much later in the year when it was egg laying time. So they tended not to move a lot. And then mid-July to mid-August when they're laying eggs, they tended to make these like big moves to try and find somewhere to lay their eggs.
Like very clean seasonality in the movements there, like really, really quite pronounced, because it's you were saying about the males, and then it sort of drops off for the rest of the year quite markedly so, right? Like it is, all go. And I wonder.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Do you know if that's similar in other parts of their range, that marked seasonality, or do you think that's a response to the sort of uniqueness of the Welsh environs there?
Yeah, I don't know. In all honesty, I don't know that anyone's actually looked in quite such the same detail. I don't know. It seemed to me as though that all the snakes always looked quite fat and happy, and by their behavior, if you assume that when they're hanging out in buildings, they're resting up, having successfully fed, and then they're doing fine, eating quite well. Yeah, they seem to be eating quite regularly. So it's difficult to sort of extrapolate. But certainly in the later part of the year, I think they went out, got their food, and then went back in, minimize time
exposure
where they could be eaten by something else. Yeah. And it was very telling where, like, if one did spend an unusual night out, like the one that got eaten by a stoat, it was always in a building at night, and it spent a night out, and that was it. So, I think they do seem to be aware of the dangers that they face, to be honest, and mitigate that.
It opens a lot of sort of questions whether that's something that's kind of inherent to Aesculapians, or maybe a sort of pressure of having to make the best of it in a sort of more edge bit of their range, in the sense that it's probably, presumably somewhat closer to their limits climatically and other ways, right?
This is it. Like, it's probably closer to their limit. But I always think, like, even when we build models about where animals can live, it's always based on where they do live. And obviously, they've demonstrated they can live there. The actual envelope they can inhabit is probably a little bit wider than you ever really see. So, it's difficult to know how hard these snakes. Yeah, I mean,
for their sake.
We'll soon find out for a lot of species with climate change. But
I suppose, for them, this introduced species, it doesn't seem like they're causing problems in any sort of marked way. They're hardly the most exotic of snake to be placed there if they were actually sort of round about 300,000 years ago. For them, shifts in climate potentially to warmer might help them out. I don't know how wetter would help or not, or drier, but like I feel like warmer's going to help them out by extending their sort of activity seasons, right?
Yeah, totally. I think so. I think that it will just probably help them a little bit, extend, like you say, because they hibernate for close to 6 months of the year. So if it gets warmer, logically you'd expect that their awake time would increase. And we actually wrote, we did a conversation piece, me and Wolfgang, about this, because Aesculapian snakes, there's some evidence that in the southernmost part of their range, climate change is actually making it too hot, and that they're declining quite a lot. And so we kind of made the case that, well, if we've got a species which is declining in the southern parts of its range, but it's being introduced to places like just above its kind of northern range limit, it's a bit of it's the philosophical question there about what we want to be conserving. I think, especially when you consider that like butterflies and birds can just fly over here. Marine animals, you know, the ranges of marine animals are shifting like crazy to get away from the hottest part of the world.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough to go to a talk recently, and I've forgotten who gave it, unfortunately, about torpor and sort of hibernation in animals, and basically along those lines, and how it's potentially more widespread and more interesting than just, you know, hibernate, not hibernate sort of thing. And just that sort of talk reminds me of that. And one of the sort of key takeaways I got from that talk was it's not necessarily like maybe the length of an activity period where you can be active in the year, or you know, how short your hibernation, brumation, torpor, whatever you want to call it, is in the bad part of the year, but it was actually sort of how it interacted in unexpected ways with the amount of food available and stuff like that. So like you could get away with a shorter activity period if there was enough food, but actually a shorter period was, you know, bad if there was not enough food or stuff like that. So there was this, it only had benefits when it was paired with another sort of change in food quantity or something along those lines. So
interesting. Yeah,
just activity periods alone wasn't enough to explain whether things helped or not in terms of
sometimes
or whatever.
It being warmer over the cold time as well can be bad. It can be good for some animals, like toads.
Exactly.
I think, yeah, common toads were crushing it if they don't hibernate as cold. But for some reptiles, they need a period that's really cold of torpor.
Yeah, it needs to. They almost need to get it cold enough to commit properly, because they're like halfway of not knowing exactly what to do can sort of catch them out. Or
it's probably just
it doesn't
they're
knock in the torpor
energy
properly.
Yeah, but so that's our study of Aesculapian snakes. It was just great to do it. And it has prompted a little bit of media, which has been nice for the most part. I went on Inside Science, the BBC program, last week, which was really fun. Yeah, I mean, what a bunch of legends on there. It was super fun. We also featured in a few newspaper articles, which I thought we could sort of have a look at because they are pretty fun. I mean, the Daily Mail one there. Urgent warning to Britons as 6.5 foot long snakes invade the UK following 2 accidental introductions. So it's quite a lot
accidental
to
in quotes if you couldn't get that from Tom's intonation there.
Yeah. So
implying
they're
some sort of pro-snake conspiratorial invasion introduction.
Yeah, right. And urgent warning to Britons. And also, like, I've never been more clear about anything. I've never told anyone they get 6.5 feet long. The maximum.
Well, if you round up to the nearest 6.5 foot, they're 6.5 foot long, right?
Yeah. There was one even bigger mention, I think. But yeah, you know, and invade the UK. Urgent warning. The thing is, though, the urgent warning. Is that me? Are we the warners of this? Are we warning people? Is that what? I didn't realize we were warning people, but a lot of these articles suggest the scientists are warning people. And actually, we warned them so intensely that the Italians heard and published it in their newspapers as well. So there's an Italian one there, which roughly translates to urgent warning.
Urgent warning.
And a few other.
Was it from maybe it was in the press release?
It definitely wasn't in the press release.
No.
But the thing is, though, these days, even though the articles have crazy headlines, that is actually an editorial decision. And even that one in the Daily Mail, which is not a publication I have any respect for, is actually a really good article, like well balanced, a lot of good intel in there. They had quotes from me and Wolfgang. They even published some figures from the paper in that Mail article showing the snake ranges and stuff. So yeah, it's always just a headline thing nowadays, which is actually much better. There's not so much scaremongering in the text, but unfortunately,
so you've got to rely on people to read that, though.
This is the thing, yeah, and like
because I tell you what,
I don't know.
I wouldn't be going reading. Well, I mean, I suppose it's Daily Mail, so I wouldn't be reading anyway. But like that sort of energy from a headline, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
like I get what you're saying, but like,
I know. I think I'm so desperate for a win when it comes to the media that when you have that first impression of the article being called something like that, and then you click on it and read it, and you actually this is halfway decent. Like, you know, I think, I can't remember who Wolfgang did interviews for and who I did, but for the most part, we got some nice coverage. So
good.
Yeah, just the headlines to fix, really. but yeah, it can be a bit stressful when all the media is coming out, just like slating the animals. But the interviews themselves are always quite nice. But I don't think I've got anything else about.
Well, it's also good that they
about
weren't slating the science as well, right? Like that's the other
true.
plus, right?
Yeah. It's good to get coverage, I think. But yeah, have you got anything else on Aesculapian snakes, or should we move on to some frogs news?
No, I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty good. Yeah, intriguing case study of mysteriously introduced Aesculapians. Like I love it.
Yeah, all right. Let's move on to some frog news. We got some good frog news here, haven't we, Ben?
Oh, we're doing frog news, are we?
Yeah. You ready for it? Yeah.
I mean, I thought we were doing a fresh species, but we can do some frog news.
I think we're doing the species not in this one.
That's totally fine. We can have some good frog news.
Yeah. So this is a species of frog called Darwin's frog, which was named after somebody called Charles Darwin.
Who?
Maybe you've heard of some guy. And the
London Zoo
frogs were threatened. Yep, ZSL again. ZSL looming large this week. And yeah, basically ZSL, massive accomplishment. So last year they went and collected some of these Darwin's frogs. They're an Australian species, right? Darwin's frog.
I didn't think they were. I thought they were Chile. Yep.
Oh, you're right. No, they are. They're Chile.
From Chile?
From Chile. Okay, yeah. So they're not an Australian species. They're from Chile, and they were essentially under serious threat from this chytrid fungus, which has been ravaging amphibian populations. We've talked about it on the podcast a lot. And so they went to this park in Chile in October last year, and they went and rescued 55 Darwin's frogs, took them back to ZSL. And what was actually really cool about this, I thought, when they were catching the frogs, some of the local guides they had out in Chile could actually mimic the calls of these Darwin's frogs. And so they were making the calls, and then the frogs were responding, and they were using that as a way to catch them, which is pretty cool.
Coax them out.
Yeah. But,
I like that. That's fun.
But yeah, they're unusual, these frogs, because they have this really unusual parental care strategy. So males fertilize eggs that females then lay. And then once they hatch out on the forest floor, the males come back and pick them up and put them in their vocal sac. So that sac which expands on the frogs. So
like some sort of land-dwelling seahorse.
Yeah, or like a little kangaroo pouch.
Yeah. There you go. That's your Australian
really
connection that you were getting confused with. That's probably what it was.
Yeah, I don't know why I thought it was Australian. It's stupid. But yeah, amazing frogs and amazing accomplishment, because ZSL, I think they realized when they collected the frogs that some of the males actually had juveniles already. So they had not only adults they'd collected, but also some juveniles as like a sort of breeding stock. And I mean, 55 individuals, you should have a good amount of genetic diversity there. But yeah, they've announced that they've successfully reproduced them in captivity. So they've bred, laid their eggs. The females have laid the eggs. The males have brooded the babies. And here we are with a successful breeding project. So yeah, just some really
Hopefully
nice,
many
good
more
news.
tiny green frogs with hilarious punchy faces.
Yeah. I need to try and see these next time I'm up there, actually. I don't know if they're on display or not. But they've also made a documentary about it called Leap of Hope, which I have put a link to in the show notes if you want to hear more about Darwin's frogs and this success. But ZSL.
Excellent. Some good conservation good news.
Absolutely. Yeah, always nice to get some. So, have you got anything else, Ben, for this episode?
No, I don't. I think we've had a couple of. I suppose the Aesculapian thing is also optimistic, to be honest, because they're living their best lives and not causing problems. And these little green guys are hopefully a little bit safer than they were previously. And it's never good to have to sort of enact a rescue mission, but it's superb news to hear that it's going well.
Yeah.
So I think it's just
absolutely.
optimism can be where we leave it.
Yeah. And so if you want to get in touch with us, if you want to ask us a question, or if we've got something wrong, you want to make a correction, email us, herphighlights@gmail.com. I'd like to hear from you. Similarly, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at herp_highlights. And I'm on Instagram too at Tom_E_major. And yeah, I don't think there's anything else, Ben, is there? So all that remains to be said is thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.